Welcome to today's webinar, Accelerate Safe AI Adoption, ISO 42001 and EU AI Act Alignment. I'm Simon and I'll be facilitating today's session. A little bit about me. My current position with Mobius is Digital Risk Consultant, and I'm based in the UK. I largely work with ISO 27001, implementation, ISMS management, and internal audits across a range of standards. The focus today is very practical. Rather than walking through regulations clause by clause, we're here to look at how organizations can safely adopt AI by bringing together ISO 42001, the EU AI Act, and ISO 27001 into something operational, manageable, and useful. Just some housekeeping before we begin. Please use the comments box to submit questions at any point. Don't be shy. We'll run a Q&A later in the session, so don't wait until then. Start now or as soon as you think of one. We'd like this to be somewhat interactive and practical, so we'd really encourage you to get involved. We'll also share relevant information with you after the session. Now, before we get further into it, I've already introduced myself, but I'd like to introduce you to the team who will be taking you through the presentation and fielding the Q&A questions later. Patrick, Mobius founder and group strategist, who leads our governance and risk thinking with a market-wide read on where it's heading and how leaders stay ahead. And 𝗘𝗨, a senior management consultant at Mobius South Africa, our 42001 lead implementer, embedding auditable AI and ISMS controls across delivery, bridging governance, and hands-on execution. And Amanda, a principal consultant here in Mobius UK, our ISO 27001 specialist, turning regulation into practical governance so teams adopt new tech safely and stay ahead of the rules. So from our own experience working with clients and across a range of industries, and this is backed by independent research, most organizations are still fairly early in their AI governance journey. If you think of it as 4 steps: haven't started, exploring or scoping, actively building, and certified or audit ready, we find most sit at step 1 or 2, with only a few further along. And one of the biggest misconceptions we run into is this idea that you need to build a whole new governance framework before you can use AI safely. In reality, most organizations are already sitting on solid foundations, their existing risk management, information security controls, and governance structures. So the challenge here isn't about starting from scratch, it's working out how to stretch what you already have to cover the new risks and opportunities that AI brings. And that's exactly what today is about. We look at how ISO 42001, the EU AI Act, and ISO 27001 fit together, what good AI governance actually looks like in practice, and most importantly, the practical steps you can take over the next 90 days to start making real progress. So just before I hand over to Amanda, I'd like to take you through this. Please keep posting questions in the comment section and we'll pick them up later in the QA session. So without further ado, Amanda, it's over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Hello, everybody. I think, firstly, thanks for joining us today and for making the time, taking an hour out of your day. As Simon said, hopefully at the end of this, you're going to get that 90-day action plan that you can basically take back to your organization from tomorrow. So just as we're waiting for the presentation to come through, there we go. All right, so I think as Simon mentioned, we really do want this to be practical for you guys. There will be a little bit of theory that we're going to run through, but the goal is really throughout today is looking at how we accelerate safe AI adoption without slowing down innovation. Obviously, that's a very important thing because I think a lot of the time that's why people are so apprehensive, is because of this view that governance is going to slow us down. So why this matters today is because AI is already in the business. It's already being used, and waiting for the perfect type of governance is not an option. We have the EU AI Act that's come into effect with its binding obligations and enforcement milestones that are already underway. And the organizations that are going to win in this race are going to treat governance as an enabler of speed and not a brake. So where we're headed throughout today, we're going to have a look at just some of the frameworks, how they fit together, having a look at the expectation of AI governance versus the reality and what it actually looks like in reality. And we're going to go through some practical steps in terms of building your AI governance to enable that safe AI adoption. And then we're going to close on that 90-day action plan that you can start tomorrow. Okay, so just diving into some of the theory. So when we look at AI governance, we leverage off of ISO 42001 as the first international management standard for AI. We also then leverage ISO 27001 as the baseline or the base for building an audit-ready AI governance capability. Those are the two best practice frameworks and standards that we look at. And then on top of that, the what must be done in terms of meeting regulatory requirements is where we look at the EU AI Act. And again, there are enforcement milestones that are already underway. I know there are dates that have been moved out, but the important thing is that we know it's coming. We know we're going to need to comply. And the sooner we start working towards that, we're going to be a lot further ahead when the time comes where it's fully enforced. So before we get into the how, it's also important that we understand the gap between the expectation versus the reality. So this picture perfect governance that we expect when it comes to AI versus the current state where AI is already running in the business. It's already there. And for some people, we're feeling like we don't have this under control. So it's always important to start with the end in mind. So I want to start with the expectation. What does good look like in theory? So in theory, we governed it before we shipped it. We governed it before we deployed it. And what this means is following best practice, basic principles. We've classified our AI. We've classified it according to the EU AI Act classification tiers. We've understood the scope of the AI that we're dealing with, which AI is important to us and why it's important. We've understood who our different stakeholders are, what are the roles and responsibilities, who needs to take ownership of the AI. We understand the role of legal and compliance and risk in relation to that. We have assessed the impact that AI has, both the positives and the negatives, and very importantly, we've assessed the risk associated with the AI. And based on that risk, we've identified the controls, but not only identified the controls, we've also embedded the controls. And we've embedded the controls in such a way that we can continuously evidence and demonstrate that the way we're managing AI is effective and working as it should. And it should be a continuous process. So that's the theory, that's the expectation, that's what we're working towards. Now, the reality of what we actually find is we have agents in production and not in our asset inventory, in our register of assets or in our AI inventory. So what this really means in reality is we've got unknown AI or shadow AI. We have AI that we might be aware of, but it's ungoverned. And a lot of the time that's just because we don't know where to start. We don't know what the first step is to make. And then we also have unreviewed third-party AI. AI platforms and solutions that are being onboarded into the organization. So for each of these, the steps that I'm going to walk you through today, we want to bring it back in line with the expectation, what we're working towards. So how do we look at each of these use cases or these scenarios and bring these things back into the expectation where we have classified our AI, we've risk assessed, we've embedded the controls, and we have evidence to demonstrate that we're managing AI in a responsible and safe way. So where do we start? And the first place that we start is by extending your information security management system. So we're not starting over. We shouldn't be starting over. What we want to do is, and in some shape or form, every organization will have some security governance that is in place, whether that is ISO 27001 in the form of an information security management system, or you have information security governance that isn't necessarily aligned to ISO. There is some governance that already exists in terms of policies, standards, how you manage risk, how you define your controls, how you manage those controls. So when we look at ISO 27001 from an information security management system perspective, and we look at the clauses and the requirements around 27001, it already includes the scope and context of information security. It includes things like leadership's commitment to information security, their roles and responsibilities, the resources that we need to fulfill this, and to manage information security. We have information security policies, or an information security policy. We have a risk methodology, how we manage our risks. We have a control catalog, and we have audit and a view of how often those audits take place and how often we assess our security posture. Those are all things that exist today. And so what we're doing, and what we're suggesting, is that we extend or add on AI into our information security management system and how we govern information security. What that basically looks like is extending your existing asset inventory to incorporate AI into that inventory and assigning roles and responsibilities to that. Enhancing your current risk methodology by incorporating the AI risk aspects to understand the AI risk and the impact of that AI. Incorporating AI controls into your controls catalog. Looking at how we measure AI, how we manage incidents. So leveraging off of, if you have an existing security incident and event management process, how do you incorporate an AI scenario into that existing process? And then lastly, third-party AI governance. So how do we govern third-party AI? So really, it's an extension. The AI management system is an extension of ISO 27001. And the payoff here, and what we're ultimately working towards, is having a unified risk register and not two separate programs that are running in isolation. And so having this structure in place, having the scope, leadership, a risk methodology, a controls catalog, how you're going to oversee, audit and manage AI, having that structure in place, there's the first practical step that we need to take. And that leads us into our inventory of AI. So we all know that you cannot govern what you do not know. So the starting point has to be inventorying that AI, getting to grips with what AI exists in our environment. And I'm sure across your organization, there are parts of the organization where you know AI is being used, and that's where you start. So gather that information, classify that information, and leverage the EU AI Act classification tiers to help you classify that in terms of prohibited AI, regulated AI, where transparency is required, and then your low-risk AI, where there are no specific obligations in relation to the EU AI Act. Assign ownership, because at the end of the day, someone's got to manage the risk across the identified AI. So whether that is your asset owner, your information owner, those two roles need to work together in order to manage that risk. And somebody needs to take accountability and responsibility for how that risk is managed. So again, basic principles of inventorying, classifying, and assigning ownership. So once you know what you have, you know who owns it, you can then assess the risk. So you can't secure what you can't see. So we need to understand what risks we're dealing with in relation to AI. So from an information security perspective, when we look at risk, we often look at risk in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Adding AI into that, we've now got to enhance that by looking at risks related to fairness, transparency, ethics, trustworthiness. So again, leveraging your existing risk methodology, how do you add these elements into that risk assessment? Based on that risk assessment, the results of that risk assessment, you can then determine the appropriate controls. So both your AI controls and ISO 42001 has Annex A, which defines that baseline set of guideline controls that you can leverage. ISO 27002, which is your information security set of controls. And there are other frameworks like NIST as well that you can look at. It's not to say that you have to use ISO. So with the risks, the controls defined, the next key question is, how do we embed all of this? What does that actually look like? And that then leads to embedding it into our delivery pipelines. So you may already have an existing pipeline. You run a DevOps methodology, an agile type of methodology. And this is where embedding the controls and how we manage AI becomes critical. And I want to focus on three key aspects here when it comes to AI, which is the risk assessment, embedding controls, and then human oversight. So I've spoken about classifying your AI. So at the point of we making this decision to build this AI agent or solution platform, we're classifying that AI and we are risk assessing that AI, both from a security perspective, from a fairness, transparency, ethics perspective, and also from a data perspective. And that happens in the design phase. Just like where you're defining your functional requirements, similarly, you're looking at, okay, how do we need to design the AI in such a way that we are considering the appropriate and responsible controls to manage the AI. Based on that, knowing the risk that we're introducing, we look at how do we build those controls? What does that look like? What are those standards? So, I mentioned your information security policy. If you've incorporated your principles around AI and how AI needs to be managed, what do those model standards need to look like in terms of, for your different types of AI, what are the standards that they need to be applied? And that's where you look at those standards and build them into the AI platform or solution that you are building. And then very importantly, because we know that AI moves at a rapid pace, is the validation. How do we test that the AI is still operating in line with the requirements that were set up front? How do we know that the AI, for lack of a better word, hasn't gone rogue? And this is where human oversight is key. So it's not to say that because we're using AI, there is no human oversight. We always need to have that human in the middle. And most likely, the frequency of how often you have the validation checks built in will need to increase because of the rapid pace at which AI moves. And then we move into, obviously, release, operate, and at some point in time, potentially decommissioning. But the key takeaway here is that, like your DevOps process, and hopefully you have a SecDevOps process where you've embedded security, embedding the AI controls is kind of, a similar approach where once it's operational and we're using it, we need to be monitoring it, and we need to be looking at the results of that monitoring and feeding it back into how that AI has been classified. Does it need to be reclassified? Maybe the way in which it's evolved, it's pushed it from a medium risk to a high risk. And so it needs to be reassessed. We then need to look at, has the risk changed? How do the controls need to change? And feed that all the way through the life cycle. So we talk about automation, and automation can handle all the different controls that we build, but none of this holds or will stand the test of time if we don't have security aware people. So that's where we turn to next. So don't discount the significant role that security awareness plays. I listened to a talk a couple of weeks ago by a lady called 𝗀𝗨 𝗔𝗰𝗁𝗁 from Anthropic. She's a very interesting job where she leads Anthropic's research partnerships with the world's wisdom traditions. So basically what that means is she helps experts in different fields to understand AI, and then she funnels that wisdom back into the people who are building the AI. And basically how she frames AI is that AI safety is a human problem. It's not just a technical one. So basically they ran this test where they developed an AI, they put it into a scenario where it needed to build code, and they would reward the AI for producing the right results. Regardless of how it got there, they would reward the AI. And what the AI started doing was cutting corners, taking shortcuts, but because it was getting rewarded, it continued in that same fashion. And it's the same concept of putting in guardrails. Because there were no guardrails, the AI then operated in a way that, regardless of ethics or what the right thing to do is, it did whatever it needed to in order to achieve the objective and get the necessary reward. So I think the key thing here, and why this really stood out for me, is that from that scenario, from that test that was done, we're starting to see that because AI is trained on our language, it means it's trained on us, it's trained on our thoughts, our wisdom, our knowledge. So the more of that we feed it, the more it is going to then respond in a way that we act and the way that we live our lives. It mirrors what we reward. So if we reward deception and corner cutting, then that's the behavior it's going to create, or it's going to generalize. And every behavior where we engage with AI creates habits, and we are teaching it how to behave. And so the point here is, when you look at AI and building AI and embedding the right kinds of controls and guardrails, it's looking at AI as an employee. So you wouldn't train employees on bad practices. You expect employees to follow your policies and your standards and do things according to best practice. And so in the same way, you should look at AI as an employee and train it on your policies, your standards, your processes, and what the right thing to do is, and incorporate those other controls like transparency, ethics, etc., into how AI is trained. And then in addition to that, because we are making use of the AI, we're feeding it the information, we are rewarding it, we want to make sure that our teams are security aware. Our teams are aware of what are the requirements that we need to be complying with, what are the risks of AI. When people understand that, they will be able to engage with AI in the right way to then teach the AI what security means, what the right thing to do is, what are our policies? What are our standards? So basically, we've kind of looked at, and I know that we could go on and on on so many different aspects, but I think we wanted to just bring it back to some of the first principles, somewhere to start, and that then leaves me just leaves you with this 90-day action plan to create that AI governance capability. So when we look at the next 90 days, the starting point, so your first 30 days, is inventorying your AI, assigning ownership, classifying that AI, leveraging off of your EU AI Act tiers, kicking off a security awareness program for your employees. And if you have an existing one, incorporate AI into that. Understand where you are in relation to AI governance. So do a gap assessment against ISO 42001, and where you already have ISO 27001 in place, reuse that. Don't discount what you already have. And then in the design and integration leading into the next 30 days, very importantly, if you don't have some kind of an AI governance committee, set one up. It's a place where people can come together, share learnings, ideas, give feedback on things that have been implemented and what's working and what's not working. Leverage your existing policies. So extend your policies to incorporate AI and risk methods for AI, and define those standards, define your model documentation, define what good looks like for your organization. And then lastly, in the last 30 days, where you actually start operationalizing this, is look at how to embed the controls in the delivery lifecycle. So right from the thought of, we need this AI to do X, Y, and Z, all the way through to operationalizing it, and how that feedback loop happens back to how we classify our AI. And test it, test what's been designed on some of your priority systems. See how that works, feed that back into your AI governance committee, and see what evidence is generated as a result of that. At some point, if not already, you're going to be audited. And if you have to comply with the EU AI Act, similarly, there's going to be audits that you're going to have to be exposed to. And so you also want to, as you're testing it, look at what evidence is generated, and is it the right kind of evidence. Okay, so I think, just to wrap up, I think the main thing is just to not get lost in all the noise. There is a lot of noise out there. When you look at what we've covered today, it's not rocket science. This is stuff that we know and we've done before. So the most important thing is just to start somewhere, and hopefully what I've taken you through today gives you a starting point. And then also just to let you all know that we're also going to be having another webinar planned for September. One of the scenarios that I mentioned earlier but haven't covered in a lot of detail is around unreviewed third-party AI. So that's going to be our next webinar, so keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Amanda. That gives us a much clearer roadmap, not only on why AI governance matters, but also on how organizations can begin approaching it in a structured and practical way. We've covered how ISO 42001, the EU AI Act, and ISO 27001 fit together, and how existing ISO 27001 capabilities can be leveraged as a baseline for a defensible and audit-ready AI governance program. We're now going to move on to the interactive part of the session and bring in the panel for a bit of Q&A. And a reminder to everyone joining us, please continue posting your questions in the comments. and Noma. I think we want to go now to the panel. Here we are. Hi, guys.
Yes, Simon.
So we've had a few questions come through. There's one from a Manazwi who asks, does aligning ISO 42001's AI-specific controls with our existing ISO 27001 ISMS provide a framework for tackling the security challenges of shadow AI? I'll put that to the team. Should Amanda be joining us also?
I'm happy to take a stab, Simon, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think based on my sorry about that. Based on my research, I would almost say everything is shadow IT shadow AI at the moment, and I think that's part of the problem. And the opportunity that companies do that are ISO 27000 aligned or certified do have is they've got a lot of the fundamentals that Amanda was talking about, and I think applying those fundamentals starting sooner rather than later will stand them in good stead. So yeah, I mean, that shadow AI is a term, and it stems from shadow IT. But I would say that in a lot of the organizations that I'm chatting to, the vast majority, if not everything, is shadow AI, because I don't think I think we've lost our minds a little bit as corporates. A lot of the fundamentals that Amanda was talking about, we just somehow haven't done with AI. Business cases, return on investment, reviews of technology before it's implemented in the organization, largely didn't take place. So we're really, really, really on the back foot here. And I think starting with something like an ISO 27000, starting with an inventory, we've got to get started with that stuff. And the ship has sailed. It's not even sailing. It's halfway across the ocean. We've got to catch up and sort of make some sort of get some sanity out of this thing. So I think what Amanda presented earlier is a very sort of practical approach. Companies with ISO 27000 can leverage off a lot of that stuff as well. And I think and maybe I'm going on a little bit here, but I mean, I think one thing that I'd urge the audience to consider is not lose sight of the first principles, not lose sight of the basics. I think there's a lot of terminology, a lot of sort of new concepts with AI, and maybe those that have been around for a while are feeling a little bit out of the depth. But there's a lot of things about just having an inventory, doing an access review, doing sort of a business case, doing a risk assessment. We all know how to do those, and somehow they haven't been done. Let's just start there, I would say.
Okay, great. Now, Robin asks, what security awareness training should we focus on? Shanil.
Cool. Yeah, happy to take that on. It's a good question. So I think AI-focused or AI governance or AI security-focused training, however you want to term it, should actually be an extension of your current information security training and awareness initiatives, if you already do have that in place. You'd obviously just want to put different angles on it, such that, for example, if, as an example, Copilot is your business approved tool, users should be made aware that they should not be uploading, any data or leveraging any other AI tools, as an example, specifically for work purposes. Another key one, we all know that data is basically the lifeblood of AI, right? So to ensure that users understand the sensitivity of data, when it comes to inputting them into AI tools and so forth. So yeah, I think in summary, pretty much run it as an extension to your current information security awareness program, but ensure to keep the key themes on AI security or AI governance as well. I think, as Amanda also mentioned, it's more than AI security. It's about AI ethics, AI transparency, and so forth. So yeah, ensuring users in your organization actually understand what does that mean practically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Shanil. Now, going through some more questions, we have one here. For organizations that know AI is already being used somewhere in the business, but do not yet have a complete picture of how it's being used, what's the most practical first step? I'm just going to put that to the panel.
I think, yeah, happy to.
I'd like everyone that doesn't use AI to put their hands up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think basically, Simon, and that's also a good question. You can't govern what you can't see, right? So it's really about establishing visibility first before establishing governance, in essence. So you need to, and Amanda touched on this during a presentation. I think Patrick also mentioned it now. You really have to understand, what AI is being used in the organization, the extent to which it's being used, what are its relevant use cases. Really inventory that, and also get an understanding of who's actually owning their AI solution within the business. That is quite a key factor. And I think it's also not about over engineering it. So you don't have to now specifically create a standalone AI inventory. Use your current inventory of assets and perhaps just flag it as an AI asset. So you almost want to integrate AI governance into your business as usual processes. And yeah, I think, once you have that level of visibility around what AI is used in the business, you can really classify your use cases based on risk. You can prioritize those with the greatest business impact, as an example, and then really apply governance, which is proportionate to that risk. And I think ISO 42001 really encapsulates this well and provides a good structured framework in order to do so. Yeah, Pat, I'm not sure if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what we were saying earlier about the shadow AI. Unfortunately, yes, we've got these inventory systems and stuff like that we apply to every other application in the organization, except AI, I would say, unfortunately. So yes, the sooner we can get back onto some sort of kind of understood process. But I think where we stand right now, as I said earlier, I kind of think that most organizations have many AI tools running within their environments. They don't even know what they are. And like you said, we need to get to grips with that first in order to determine what the appropriate guardrails are. I think the next almost phase of AI is going to be kind of determining what we're actually running, as I'm speaking on as an organization. What are we actually running, and how do we consolidate this? Do we need as much? Because I fail to believe that there's not a lot more AI running within organizations than is needed. And the extent of the risk that each one of those poses, you mentioned earlier around the data governance, that terrifies me. I mean, I've been in this game for a long time. I know most organizations don't necessarily have their data governance up to sort of an acceptable level, and we've kind of thrown the barn doors open to AI and say, go dig around and tell me what you can see. So I think where we are currently, or have been, is a little bit of data security by obscurity. No one knew where that salary spreadsheet was, so no one found it, and it was never exposed. And AI is going to just trawl all of that stuff, what it's got access to. So, I think it's critical to take a practical approach, and to if you do have an application inventory and AI is on that, and all your AI is on that, well done. Give me a call. I'd like to interview you. But otherwise, identity and access management systems, see where AI calls are being made, network and DNS logs, having a look through the traffic and actually seeing where things like Anthropic or whoever is being processed. Your endpoint security, things like Intune, have a look at those, see where traffic's being kind of driven via AI systems. Within your cloud environments, how is AI being used within your AWS Bedrock, for example, the developer environments, your GitHubs, where the SDKs for OpenAI on there. And that's all within our estate. And then beyond our estate as well, there's the embedded AI. So we're running, let's say, Salesforce. Salesforce has got AI in it. How is that using our corporate data? Do we understand that? And then by extension, I think getting on to the next webinar that we're going to be hosting in September is third parties. How are third parties using AI on our corporate data? Because, you know, as we understand from third-party risk management, we're still responsible for that data. And so it's a very, very good question. Not an easy answer, but definitely something we need to get to grips with. I think, as 𝗀𝗨 said earlier, you know, you can't govern what you don't know. So we need to sort of increase that understanding of what our application inventory is very quickly.
Great, thanks, 𝗀𝗨 and Pat. A few more here. Many organizations worry that introducing governance will slow down innovation. How can organizations strike the right balance between enabling AI adoption while managing risk appropriately?
I'll take a stab at that. I think it's horses for courses. I think it's, you know, the EU AI Act has got some nice classifications that you can apply to new AI that gets introduced into the organization or existing. And so you apply the appropriate controls depending on if it's a high risk, medium risk, low risk application. I think an analogy I've started using, again, it's a pretty old analogy, is the brakes on a car. You know, brakes on a car don't actually, well, they do help you stop, but they actually help you go faster. So if we've got the right controls in place, it will help the organization actually kind of adopt AI more. And if we've got the guardrails in place, we can expose that AI to all of our employees and et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have the guardrails in place, you might be nervous to sort of expose the AI beyond sort of a small group of people. So I think it's having the right controls for the right level of risk and data exposure that the specific AI has access to.
Thanks, Pat. What is one of the biggest misconceptions organizations have about AI governance or ISO 42001? 𝗀𝗨, do you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to take that one. So I think, you know, while compliance is important, you know, I think a lot of people think that AI governance is simply a compliance exercise. So yes, as I said, while compliance is important, you know, AI governance fundamentally, I think, is about building trust really within the organization, improving like accountability, and really to ultimately enable sustainable adoption of AI within the business, right? I think another misconception is that if you sort of going on an ISO 42001 journey, as an example, is that you have to start from scratch. That is really not true, especially for organizations who have, you know, in some way or form aligned with a best practice standard like ISO 27001, or even are currently certified against 27001 as an example. A lot of the baselines are pretty much the same. When I say baselines, I mean the actual management system. They're very similar. There's a lot of similarities between the two. And, you know, once you have those fundamentals in place from an information security perspective, it becomes a bit simpler to bolt on very similar principles as it relates then to AI management, right? A simple example would be, I don't know, if you have like your statement of applicability as a certified organization, you can really bolt on then the NXA controls within ISO 42001. So you're almost leveraging 27001 as a base and then bolting on the AI governance component to your entire stack, basically. Another maybe simple example I want to mention is like, and it goes back to my point on not complicating governance. You know, a lot of organizations obviously have an acceptable use policy. There's not necessarily a requirement to actually now create a standalone AI acceptable use policy. You most certainly can just include acceptable use of AI policy statements as an example within your current AUP. And then, as per the previous question from the audience earlier, I think was around training and awareness, you still embed that, you know, within everything holistically.
Thanks, 𝗀𝗨. And here's one I'll put out to the panel. Pat seems to have dropped off for a moment. He's coming back.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Pat. I'm just going to put the next one out to
Thank
the
you.
panel. If an exec team asked you to demonstrate meaningful process over the next 90 days, what would you prioritize first?
So let me start with that one, and I think you can elaborate further as well. I think my starting point and my advice to any exec would be pretty much the theme we've spoken about throughout this presentation. Understand how AI is being used within your organization and the extent to which it's being used. Then follow that up with, getting foundational governance in place, things like an AI governance policy, an acceptable use policy, as I referred to earlier, and then really focusing in on AI risk and impact assessments. I think those top 3 things I would focus on. Yeah, Pat, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely echo what you said there. I think it's 2 streams that can run in parallel. I think the top-down governance type stuff, your policy, your awareness, your standards that need to get applied, that can happen in parallel with what you mentioned around getting an understanding of the inventory and what application, what AI we're actually using in the organization. Maybe just for the audience to be aware, we're in the final steps of developing a product which will be free for you to use to plug in the details of your specific AI tool that you need to assess. It will apply the EU AI Act sort of questions and tell you whether it's kind of high risk, low risk, medium risk, as well as give you some recommendations for things that you need to kind of consider. So that's, in my mind, that's one of the obstacles, because you need to get an inventory of the AI that you're using, and then do a risk assessment, a quick risk assessment, so that you can determine sort of what the next steps are. I think those are things that can run in parallel with the governance. Obviously, thereafter, organizations would need to then consider, do we need all this AI? Because for each of those AI tools, you're going to have differing guardrails. You're going to have controls that you need to apply for different sort of AIs. And I think a previous question was, is sort of governance going to stifle some of the innovation? It shouldn't, as long as we're right-sizing the types and the numbers of tools that we're utilizing. If we can get that down to the right number of tools that is going to have the best benefit for the organization, put the appropriate guardrails in place for those tools, then we're going to be able to run. At the moment, we've just got this kind of mess, and if we put guardrails across all of those, that is going to be difficult.
Thanks, guys. This is an interesting one. Where should ownership of AI governance sit within an organization?
Yeah, I think so. AI has a lot of various touch points within an organization, right? It can touch obviously IT, obviously information security, legal, compliance, etc. I think what we find is, or what we advise as well, is to have an AI almost steer code, and this doesn't have to be a brand new steer code. It can be an extension of an existing one, for example. And really have representation from each of the different business units which AI is touching on. In that way, you get a really cohesive, I think, approach towards managing and making key decisions around AI. I think that's typically what my advice would be. Patrick, not sure if you have differing thoughts. You agree as well?
Yeah, and I do agree with you, Shanil, because I think at this stage, there's no single owner. I think that the board needs to have oversight. I think, and forgive me, and I might get into trouble for this, I think the boards and senior leadership are a little bit, I don't want to say to blame, but maybe I'm going to say to blame for where we are at the moment, because I think there's a panic in the market that everyone's doing AI, so our company has to do AI. How should we do it? We don't know. Let's just do AI. And that's coming from the top down, and that's, we've got this sort of lots of AI that we now need to deal with. But having said that, the board does need to take a kind of overall accountability for sort of what we're doing in the organization. But I think what 𝗀𝗨 points out correctly is, at this stage, I think we need to be having the discussions. I think the discussions are more important than the single accountability, the single owner of AI, because we're not having those discussions. Risk isn't being considered. Data isn't being considered sufficiently. So yes, it's legal, it's HR from an ethical perspective. All of those discussions need to be taking place. So I do completely agree with 𝗀𝗨. Some sort of committee, and I'm not a big fan of committees because I know they can sort of slow things down, but I think we need to be having those discussions in order to kind of arrive at what's going to be a sustainable, more efficient solution. But the discussions need to take place right now. In the future, we are starting to see the term Chief AI Officer starting to materialize. That's obviously for your larger corporates. I think for corporates where that term doesn't yet apply, if we're going to have one person that we're going to look at, it's probably going to be your COO, someone with a broad sort of view across the organization, and maybe slightly smaller organizations, your CIO could take that role. I don't think that this is a technology play at all. It's an organizational change play. So we need to kind of bear that in mind, and who the right person is depends on the organization. But I think we need to be having far more discussions as to what does this mean from an ethical perspective, from a risk perspective.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Thanks very much. We've got one more question. What is the one thing organizations should avoid doing when they start their AI governance journey?
Yeah, so I think from my side, it's probably like boiling the ocean. You really don't need to go big bang approach first. Again, I'll circle back. It's really about what AI you're using in your organization, and then governing that appropriately by putting in governance guardrails, and then having a good idea on the risks and impacts associated with that use of AI. I think another thing is also going in completely different directions, which relates to the previous question that you asked, Simon. Have representation from different parts of the business instead of just setting off in your own direction. And then, you're always going to be almost at loggerheads with business and seen as a blocker rather than, a secure enabler for AI within the business. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything on that, Pat?
I'm just going to agree with 𝗀𝗨 again.
Well, there's no more questions coming through at the moment. So should we bring Amanda back in for the closeout?
Hello.
Hi, Amanda.
All right, cool. Yeah, I think thank you, 𝗀𝗨 and Pat, for your insights, and I think making it a bit more practical in terms of what you seeing day to day, and the conversations that you are having with various organizations. I think it'll be really cool to come back in maybe a few months' time, and hopefully organizations are a lot further along. Simon, the slide that you showed where we're just in the initial stages, and maybe it's progressed, and to have a conversation around that and where organizations are and what's worked and what hasn't worked. Because I think, like Pat, you saying, it's important to have the conversation. And I think, Simon, to your question around what is the one thing, or the question that was raised, what is the one thing that you would avoid doing? I think it would be to not start anywhere, and just to kind of, sort of sit and wait and see what happens. Just start somewhere. Pat, you always say, we're all learning in this space. It's something new. It's a new concept. We're all learning. So the more conversations we have, the more we can learn from each other, the more progress we're going to make. So yeah, I think, and Simon, thank you so much for emceeing for us today and keeping us on track and facilitating. Thank you to everybody that has joined on LinkedIn. We appreciate you being here. Please, we've got our contact details up on the screen at the moment. If there are any questions that you would like to discuss or a conversation that you would like to have, please do reach out to any of us presenting today. All our details are on LinkedIn as well, so please do reach out. And then I think just lastly, 2 key things Pat mentioned, the tool that we're busy working on that we're going to roll out to assist with classifying AI. I think if that is something that you're interested in, you want to know more about, again, reach out to us. I'm happy to talk you through that and share what that looks like with you. And then also keep an eye out for our next webinar where we're going to talk about third-party AI in September. So keep an eye out for that, and hopefully we'll see you all then again. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. I believe we will be sending out some info sheets to the people that have registered with us today. If you don't get anything, just drop us a line. We can facilitate you with our ISO 42001 info sheet. And any closing thoughts?
Janelle?
One from my side is just don't lose sight of the basics. You know, I think we're in a brave new world here, but a lot of the basics that I mentioned earlier, sort of, as 𝗀𝗨 said, like understand what we're dealing with. Let's look at things like access. Let's look at things like business cases, return on investment, risks. We know how to do those. So how we would apply them is slightly different, but don't, for the rest of the audience, don't feel like you've got imposter syndrome. Start with stuff you do know. It's valuable.
100%. Yeah, I think maybe just final closing from my side. It's actually a bit of a quote that I read the other day and I actually wrote it down for today's webinar. It says the future belongs not to the organizations with the most AI, but to the organizations with the most trusted AI. And I think that pretty much sums up AI governance holistically for everyone. Yeah.
I'm not even going to add anything to that. I think that wraps it up really nicely. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.